Okay, this is our last class for the semester until we start up again in the fall. And I'm aiming to do 4 verses tonight, which shocked a lot of people, and it probably won't come to pass. But that's the goal, without rushing too quickly through them all, which would leave us as a logical cutoff point of the verses to go back into chapter 9 in the fall and return. Where we are is, let's see, page 26, 27, is that it on the text?
24, 25.
Okay, 24, 25. There's a little problem here, those of you who have the text in front of you, and hopefully I just have the same version I think that you do, which is the interface of the Chinese and English. But if you notice, either the Chinese or the English is off here. There's not a correct alignment of the verses. If you look, for example, where we're going to start tonight, let's see. The English has, perhaps someone sees him as a victorious hero.
Yeah. Seems like they mixed up the translation.
So it's actually, but the Chinese on the other side doesn't match. So the Chinese for the English is, let's see, is 1 too soon, or the English for the Chinese is 1 too late. So I don't know which is which. I'm going to reverse the English, assuming that the Chinese, and I don't know why I assume that.
It makes sense because of the order of if you look at he leaves home, he sits in the way place.
Victorious hero,
and then he teaches.
Right.
So you can see there's an order, but the English got switched.
So one way to solve this in favor of the English or the Chinese is just as Jin Chuan suggested. There seems to be an order or a sequence to the activities of an awakened being. The one previous is the leaving home, then there would be sitting in the way place, and after the way place experience, heroism, and so forth, turning the Dharma wheel, and then the manifestation of this awesome lion's roar, brilliance and virtue, and then it ends with this idea of there's still quiescence, there's still and silent in the middle of this, which is a really powerful, you might say either contradiction or oxymoron, where you have this trajectory of starting out, going through the stages of spiritual development, accomplishing full awakening, teaching and transforming, having these powers and virtues, like a great lion, it says, and yet it returns to or stays grounded in this still quiescence.
I think that also could be nirvana, because Ji Jing often could be nirvana, so you could be going off to nirvana at the very end.
Could be.
Yeah. Could
be. So let's leave that as a question when we get to how we're going to translate the, what do you have, the Yung Mia?
Ji Jing. Xing Ji Jing.
The last verses.
The Huo Jian Xing Ji Jing. The last verse.
The last verse is Ru Shi Deng Yung Mia.
No, move the cursor over move the PDF over a little bit. There's another verse. Huo Jian Xing Ji Jing.
So is that out of order too?
No, it's right. The PDF page you have to shrink to be able to see the whole verse in Chinese.
I can see the verse. You have Ho Jian Shi Zi Huo, right?
Yeah, then you go down one more.
Ho Jian Xin Ji Jing.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying there is, this is a very important thing. Whether we take these to be Chinese binomes for technical terms like nirvana, or whether we actually translate them as the English version does here, as still and quiet. I myself favor translation over, how shall I put it? Over reliance on technical terms, because I think for newcomers into the Dharma, without interpreting these key phrases, nirvana, dukkha as suffering, klesha as afflictions, bodhi as awakening, and so forth, if we leave them in their original, in one sense you could say it's more faithful. But if you're working at it on a level of self-cultivation and an existential engagement, then leaving these as formal, almost in a sense religious terms, puts them up away from the human and makes them inaccessible.
Far
And
away from us.
you agree with that too, huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so, given my background as not necessarily purely academic, but sort of scholar practitioner, I prefer to really translate it into active, dynamic language as much as we can. Now, there are cases, and the Chinese recognize this as well, there are cases where there isn't an English equivalent. There's not a ready English equivalent. And then, to be both faithful and honest, you leave it in the transliterated form. So, in this case, we're talking here is translation theory. And I would favor translation over transliteration, and I'd favor translation over, I will call it a little slavish, faithful devotion to technical terminology. If you do the technical term and you do a translation, I think it's really important then to have clear footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the clear footnote, and footnotes can be really powerful. You go down to a footnote and you say, we translate this to nirvana. Nirvana means, and you go through what nirvana means. It comes from the Sanskrit original, which means can be said as blowing out a flame or letting the fire die out. A number of things here. And then it has also this other meaning. Unfortunately, it's been mistranslated. This is all your footnote into the Western as mean extinction, which is the radical denial of existence and the end of being, which is in da-da-da-da-da. And then you go on other terms or other ways of expressing are such and thus. There is some argument in different texts whether this is a final state or merely a high state of accomplishment that doesn't have an end or beginning. It's beyond both of those. And therefore it's not what we think it is as a heavenly abode where one just sits on one's throne for infinite time, or some extinction of being entirely. And then some people say it is. There's no more birth and death. But then as we look at the text, we wonder, well, what happens to those vows that say my vows are endless, living beings are boundless, I'm bound to go on and do all this. And well, how are you going to do this if you're no longer coming and going? Sorry. So anyhow, that's a footnote. The problem with footnoting is once you get into it, it can take up the whole page. I mean, I find it really fun and interesting. But you're reading a text and you think, thus I have heard, the text please, and the rest of the page is all footnotes. Thus refers to da-da-da-da-da. I could be the conventional I or the enlightened I. There's a not to know self. You go to heard, was it heard or seen, or what does it mean to hear, and this is sound. And now you're done with page one, and you've got extensive footnotes. So, middle way, strike a balance. But if you're going to strike a balance, I would favor balancing it more towards the immediately understandable in the translation directly. And then if you wanted to, you could say we translate this still and quiet, referring to this state of mind, also known as nirvana. Then you would reference that to somebody else. This is my preference. Not everybody will necessarily agree with that. But so what I'm going to do, just for the sake of tonight, I'm going to read the first two in Chinese. We'll read them together, the first two verses, which are translated as Victorious Hero, and then I will reverse the commentary. So we'll start with the second one first and the first one after that. OK， 或见做道场，觉知一切法，道功德彼岸，痴安烦恼尽。或见圣丈夫，具足大悲心，转有妙法轮，度无量众生。Okay. And again, just for people who are interested, and when I look at these usually as I'm sort of getting ready for the evening, I wrestle with and do some adjustment translation. So I'm going to maybe suggest something tonight. So we go to the first one, sitting in the way place. Perhaps someone sees him sitting in the way place. I would put awakening to and understanding all dharmas rather than enlightened to and knowing. I like the understanding because to me it conveys something of a dynamic process of inquiry and insight. Knowing almost sort of like as past tense. And it's like, well, how? But understanding is something that comes about through activity. Knowing can be just there. One knows this. But understanding is a learning process. I prefer awakening to enlightening because, again, just that in the standard translation of Bodhi in the West, enlightenment or enlightening became to be felt as some spiritual mystic experience rather than, again, a process of self-discovery and self-unfolding, which is I awoke. I woke up and saw this. Enlightening sometimes has the idea that it's coming from without. So that's just a slight preference there. Arriving at the other shore of merit and virtue. And here, you don't exhaust the darkness. He exhausts the darkness of stupidity and affliction. So read it again. Perhaps someone sees him sitting in the way place, awakening to and understanding all dharmas, arriving at the other shore of merit and virtue. And then the last line, he exhausts the darkness of stupidity and afflictions. It's just in English, you don't exhaust darkness. You know what I mean? So I think what probably you prefer here is it dispels the darkness of stupidity and afflictions. Yeah. Okay. And then just a little bit about, let's do the second verse too, and then we'll just kind of combine the commentary. Then I'll be able to get through 4 tonight, maybe. The next line is, perhaps someone sees him as a victorious hero, replete with a mind of great compassion, turning the wonderful Dharma wheel, crossing over limitless living beings. So again, here I would just play a little bit. I think victorious hero is fine, but I want to say a little bit about this because it has primarily a different dimension. When you read about victorious heroes, usually in the Western classical tradition, these are individuals who have triumphed over adversaries or incredible external conditions of tribulation, and often they're military, and they're violent. The Iliad and the Odyssey and so forth. Beowulf. Even to some extent, I'm thinking of the Middle Eastern early, what's the classic that we study in the...
Middle Eastern?
Yeah. Early classic, one of the earliest.
Gilgamesh?
Gilgamesh,
Gilgamesh.
right. And
yeah.
Again, all of these you have...
Yeah, he definitely...
Yeah, you have...
A lot of killing.
Yeah, there's a lot of blood. Anyhow, so I would keep that, but I would say instead of replete with a mind of great compassion, I would say his mind filled with great compassion. Replete with a mind, really what's talking about here is the fullness of compassion is present. One is not replete with a mind of. And again, mind of is, in these texts, is just referring to the mind, heart, mental, emotional, total functioning of a being. it's not literally what we mean as just consciousness. In this text, when you're working with mind, you can almost leave it out. And that's what I do here. Instead of saying replete with a mind attitude, however you want to do it, just say his mind filled with great compassion, or his heart filled with great compassion. Or you could even say perhaps someone sees him as a victorious hero, filled with great compassion, effulgent with great compassion. Because mind is just conveying a kind of total incorporation into one's being. Okay? This is not, again, in these texts, particularly mind is a distributed property of many qualities, mental, emotional, intellectual, and so forth. It's not an entity, it's not a thing. And then turning the wondrous dharma wheel, crossing over limitless beings. So, I would say the victorious hero part, I would say here it's important to understand that the hero in the Buddhist classics, in this tradition, is someone who conquers his or own faults and shortcomings and bad habits. They are free of thirst, of craving. And that is a conquest. That is an accomplishment. This requires a lot of cultivation, a lot of honesty, really good methodology, patience, good teachers, good community, a deep resolve, vigor, all the paramitas, the whole bag goes into this kind of conquering. But the conquering isn't to beat it down or suppress it, it's to actually transform it. And that's why you have the crossing over going on here rather than eliminating. Because the crossing over limitless beings in this particular passage can refer to other beings. But also, if you read Hui Neng in the Sixth Patriarch directly, it starts with crossing over the living beings of your own nature. So this is where the compassion comes in. This is a very interesting passage. When one overcomes or conquers these faults and bad habits and shortcomings, and seeing other people as things that you acquire, manipulate, and use, and seeing yourself as a thing to be used and manipulated and so forth, when you get past that, you're able to feel and express compassion. And compassion then comes out naturally from the conquest. So one doesn't have to generate great compassion, one has to sort of deconstruct the self. When the self is deconstructed and back to its original ground, compassion is the natural flowing out of that fullness. And then the verse says, being one, the end of a verse says, being one with everyone is great compassion. I mean, having this identity and sympathetic, empathetic understanding and feeling for all. It's the opposite. Instead of being one with oneself, this is narcissism. Being one with me, that's not great compassion. That's really narcissism. But also being one with one is a limitation of compassion too. I am one with whoever I love, with my lover, my husband, my wife, my country, blah, blah, blah. Narrowing compassion, narrowing identity down to being one with one, whatever that one is not dabe. It's not great compassion. So you have to understand that great compassion, when you conquer yourself, you also conquer these attachments and desires you have to own or possess somebody else or something else. When that is gone, then naturally your sympathies and your identity goes out to all beings throughout all time. All beings, not just people. So this is great compassion, and it's not the same as being one with one. Most people want to unite with somebody, to be with somebody, to have their soulmate or whatever. It's okay, but it's not great compassion. And it's really a collapse of the functioning of one's compassion down to a sort of passionate attachment. And as much as you want to hang on to that, sorry to tell you, as if you haven't found that out yet, you can't. You can't hang on to any one thing or any one setting up like that. It just doesn't conform to reality. All things conjoined come apart, says the Buddha. All things joined with separate. This is one of the fundamental truths behind the truth of dukkha, is understanding that. The crossing over language here is okay for me. I like it because it's a little more poetic. It has, if I think about it as a ferry boat crossing where I grew up, there were many rivers, and often these rivers didn't have bridges, but instead of bridges, they had ferry boats. And the ferry boat, you get on one side. Sometimes the ferry boat would take cars, and sometimes it wouldn't. But you get on the ferry boat, and you go from one shore to the other. And then the ferry boat would take people from that shore back and just go back and forth. So I like the image of crossing over because it has a sort of a transformative quality to it. In this case, the crossing over is a transformative teaching. That's where it says, turning the wonderful Dharma wheel. How does he cross over? This is key. He crosses over not by commanding, not by scolding, and not even necessarily by carrying them across. Because in this teaching, the only crossing over is the transformation of your own self, by your own self, through your own self. Bodhisattvas or Buddhists in this case only show how to do that. So the teaching, the turning the wonderful Dharma wheel, is basically telling it like it really is, telling it truly like it really is. That becomes the ground for people then able to change their attitude, change their minds, and cross themselves over. That's why it says the sea of suffering is vast, but the turn of the head, the turn of understanding and attitude is the other shore. Then you just go and do it. This matches the Dhammapada verse too, where it says, no one saves you but yourself, or liberates you, or crosses you over but yourself. No one can, no one may. You yourself must walk this path, or swim this river, what do you want to do? Buddhas only show the way. So that's why these two are important. By turning the wheel, he crosses over. In other words, it's teaching. In other words, education. Okay? Another pitch for seeing these as a transformative teaching rather than a religious doctrine. And the thrust of it is educational. The thrust of it is educational. My teacher's comment on this is really interesting. He said, the Buddha sees all living beings as being the same as his own sons and daughters, as one's own family, and uses this, then employs this great compassionate mind in all of his or her activities. So this is the defining feature of an awakened being. It's not necessarily spiritual powers, psychic powers, although this we'll see later is a component. The real manifestation is this compassion. And this compassion's manifestation is the absence of an attachment to a self, of a me and mine. And it doesn't mean you don't attend to me and mine. It just means you don't fixate on it and you don't see it as the center of the world. And my teacher always says, this is easy to say but hard to do, to generate this mind. But if you can do it, it makes everything so much easier. This really is an interesting, that compassion comes from liberation, but compassion also leads to liberation. It's very interesting. Once you're liberated from the myopic, narrow anchor of self, everything starts to open up. And then once everything starts to open up, it makes everything even more easy to relate to people. Because, all the fighting, backbiting, the constant put down, manipulating, the calculating treatment of others, it all comes to a stop. It stops. And that's pretty cool. I mean, if you think about removing that from your interactions socially with people, wow, I would say 90%, I'm just throwing out this figure, you can push back, of our relationships with people consist of judgmentalism, judging them back and forth, looking for attention, trying to get attention, backbiting, gossiping, fighting, competing, putting down, or falsely manipulating to put up in terms of you want to get something, which is flowery, buttery stuff, and basically calculation. It's all, most of it is instrumental. We're calculating all the time. I got how many likes on my Facebook or whatever, just like calculation. Oh, I lost this. Ooh. Maybe I can take his away, or or trick her.
The recipe how to be successful in the world.
That's right. That is why, from an enlightened point of view, these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are losers. My teacher just said, they're big dummies. And he said, how do you get to be a big dummy? He says, that's not easy. But if you want to be a sage, first you have to be a big dummy. This is his actual line. And what he meant by big dummy is you stop the fighting, the competing, the backbiting. You stop striving to beat everybody else and being successful and so forth. You let go of all that till you look like a dolt. You look like a dummy. But then your wisdom light, your brilliance starts to shine within. And that is a really powerfully attractive person. And this is what the next verse is going to talk about, the brilliance of the light that comes from this. But you're absolutely right. This is not what they would teach you in an MBA program. Anyhow. This is really, I'm going to bring this point up and say a little bit about it, but I think part of the manifestation of great compassion is coming from a great letting go. A great letting go. And when you release your hold and let go, then the compassion, but part of this is also being able to forgive without bitterness or revenge. So, I want to go into this a little bit because people say, I can't be compassionate because someone has really dissed me, wronged me, hurt me. And and it's like, to be compassionate would mean that somehow I have to get past and forgive them, and I just can't forgive them. And because one can't forget, you can't forgive. And because you can't forgive, you can't forget. It's a mutual thing that you're in. But I want to say something tonight about that. I don't want to be Pollyanna naive and just say, oh, forgive your enemies. It's not that easy. And I don't think it really works, and I don't even know what that means. I don't know that I have the power or capacity to forgive. That's something that comes from the person, him or herself, as they seek to repent and change from what they did. And where that works out karmically and how that works out in terms of agency really is not necessarily under my control. I can't forgive you for certain things that you do. You're forgiven by your acts of repentance and renewal. You're forgiven by the way you reconstruct or move on from that or not. And you're forgiven by the playing out of that karma when it exhausts itself. But I'm not the agent for that forgiveness. I would translate forgiveness more as it literally means stop feeling angry, resentful towards someone for an offense, flaw, or mistake. Stop feeling that way. That's very different. So forgiveness doesn't mean I have the power to erase what you did, but I can stop feeling this. This is really critical, because what that means is that you are back, you refuse to go down and be controlled by this. It doesn't mean you naively pretend nothing ever happened, only that you will not allow yourself to be defined and deformed by it or frozen by what happened. This is really quite a different approach to it, but I think it's very important to understand, at least in a Buddhist sense. Forgiveness, one of the things my teacher said, no matter what it is, no matter what happens to you, good, bad, whose fault, your fault, someone else's fault, do not attach to it. Do not cling to it. Keep unattached, unbound, moving. Everywhere engaged, nowhere attached. Then you'll be in the state where everything's okay, no problem. As soon as you can't let go or see through something, it will obstruct you. And if you say, yeah, I can see through and let go of everything, but that person, I just can't forgive them. What you're doing is you're not forgiving yourself. You're locking yourself down by that. You're actually, stopping yourself. You're hurting yourself. And there's no reason to do it. The event is over. It's gone. It can't be recovered. It can't be changed in that way. It can't be returned to. All you can do is refuse to allow the feeling to linger. This is what non-attachment means. It doesn't mean you don't feel it. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean it wasn't real. You just refuse to dwell in the feeling of anger and resentment. Yeah.
So is that the etymology of the word, or is the...
That's a literal definition of forgiving. And we always think of it as towards somebody else. But if you look at it carefully, it has you could say it has at least two dimensions. I choose to front load the first one, which is not staying in, not, how should I say, not allowing yourself to continue to feel angry, resentful towards. That means you are stopping yourself from this feeling of. You can't, even if you forgive, that doesn't mean that person is going to, quote, accept it or internalize it or even be liberated by it. You're not the agent for that, but you are the agent of your own liberation and destiny. And if you allow yourself to cling to any feeling, whether it's ecstasy or resentment and anger, you'll be obstructed. You're stopping what by nature cannot be stopped. And that's what attachment is. And so everything moves on except you. So there's two ways of looking at forgiveness. It's not dwelling in, not clinging to, not allowing yourself to continue to feel anger and resentment towards usually someone for something they did to you. But if you thought about that, it can be a lot easier. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking for some kind of justice or restorative, that has to be something individuals initiate in their own heart and mind. If I've done something to you, and you forgive me, unless there's a corresponding reversal of my attitude and so forth, it's an incomplete thing. You can't guarantee, you can't control that other person's. You may stimulate it. It may be a nice gesture to do, is actually say, I'm going on, I'm moving on, I'm not holding this in myself, and I hope you let go of this too in your own way that you have to, but that means coming to terms with what you did. But it's not my job to bring you to that point, any more than it was my fault that you did this. It is a compassionate position, but unless you let go, because sometimes what happens, people say, oh, he apologized and whatnot, I still can't forgive him. Wow, that's like double whammy now. Now the problem's with you. And you've allowed a single event to basically to turn in your trajectory of your life. How foolish. How foolish.
It's kind of keeping wound open all the time, and by this keeping this resentment, we repeating harming ourselves moment by moment.
That's a beautiful image, that you're picking at a scab and it's trying to heal, and you keep picking it and trying to keep it open, and it never is allowed to heal, and then it gets infected and so forth. Yeah.
Question, so I'd be curious, because we sometimes have in our ceremonies, I know in the Theravada, during their evening chanting, they actually go to the Buddha and ask for forgiveness. And this is actually very interesting, because I haven't really thought about this that deeply, but I think within the kind of our inherited Western tradition, forgiveness is definitely connected with God, and we've done something wrong to God, and now God forgives us, and okay, things are okay. But it seems like that's not quite the framework within Buddhism. So when we quote unquote ask for forgiveness, what are we asking for? Is it
good question?
Letting ourselves go, letting ourselves say, I'm going to repent and renew?
I think maybe you could see it this way: there's a private or a personal, psychological, and a social dimension to an act that provokes us. The most important for me is the personal, psychological acknowledgement that I did this, really, to the point that there's no covering it over, rationalizing, pretending. I did this, it was really egregious, it was wrong. I sincerely repent and acknowledge this, and I, from this day forward, will never do this again. Mm-hmm. That, to me, is the heart of the Buddhist agency there. At the other hand, you have to say, however, because we are interdependent, interrelated, no act is isolated unto itself. No person is an island. And so our actions reverberate and have effects. So therefore, at the next level, at the social level, you acknowledge that. But I remember our repentance and renewal, at least when the master was around, were public. And you had to really show your sincerity. Not just show it, you had to be there. If you tried to show it, it was seen through. And only that first step, then the master would often say, so what do you think? A person's willing to come forward and do this. They've had this effect on the community. But unless we also let this go and not hold it against them, there's no one that's going to go forward. But if we can all go forward, and you in the future, when you're in that position, will be here socially as well, and you can do it. But the forgiveness was a reciprocal action between the social and the psychological. And the thing that united was utmost sincerity and truthfulness. If it's not, if it's pro forma, or you're doing it for the lawyer who tells you to, okay, just say you're sorry to the people you killed and hopefully you get a lighter sentence, that doesn't work. That doesn't express this. So I would say the forgiveness is mutually reciprocal, but stems from the heart of great acknowledgement of my error and falseness.
It's interesting what you say, Marty. You remind me that in the process of recovery, very often, is the kind of stage, I think the AA steps, that in the group you really truly say what you did. You kind of to the group confess that I'm addicted, and it's very powerful. Many people saying this, but also they saying you cannot fault the group. They in the moment can feel that is some misalignment, that you are trying to cheat or you are not honest enough. So it's a very powerful tool to kind of share from your heart.
Yes.
What's happening in your life, and this is the process of kind of recovering, kind of leaving.
But
the addiction.
even if you could fool the group in terms of a karmic system, there's absolutely no gain and great loss in doing that, because then you yourself have harbored this poison, and that little bit of poison, just like a bit of cancer, will grow and metastasize again and come back. So the only effective change is total acknowledgement and repentance, and bringing it all out without, well, there's extenuating circumstance, me, blah, blah, blah. You get past all of that. At that point, this is the powerful thing as far as I'm concerned, and why it takes up such a huge section of the Platform Sutra. It's the largest chapter on repentance and renewal, because that's the dynamic mechanism by which we go from ordinary people to sages, and go from constantly making mistakes and errors to correcting and renewing. If it were a fate-bound or destined-bound system, there'd be no hope. But it only works if the mind is absolutely true, if the heart is turned. This is the beauty of it. It's like, sure, you can fool so-and-so and so, but you're never going to fool yourself. And it's you yourself that has to become a Buddha. It's not like, oh, I fooled everybody, maybe they'll give me Buddhahood now. No, it's not like that. It's not a performance.
So, Yun Lin just texted me, and he said he thinks that the words were from the evening ceremony of the Theravada. May my acknowledgement of fault be accepted, that in the future there may be restraint regarding the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That my acknowledgement of fault be accepted, that in the future there may be restraint regarding the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
Restraint.
Yeah. I won't do that. I won't do it again.
But you see how mutually interconnecting and reciprocal it is, and how operative versus directive or dogmatic.
Yeah, like don't punish me in the future, please, Buddha.
Right, but there's a genuine humility there. There's a genuine humility there, not a pretense of humility, and it's from that ground. I mean, every time you bow, this is sort of what one should be doing in bowing. Is really opening up the heart, cleansing the heart, acknowledging and making new. This is a constant phoenix rising from the ashes every time, if you do the bowing correctly. I know people come in and bow to Buddha, Dharma, okay, and then I'm out. Well, I mean, I don't know. That sometimes, anyhow, I can't imagine there's anything to that. But if your mind and heart and body bow simultaneously and have this reflection of how can I become a better person? How can I get rid of those things that I've done and not do them again? People will pick up on that immediately and be more forgiving and understanding. So I see this as a highly interactive, mutually reciprocal phenomena. And then when you say you forgive somebody, that only works if there is a corresponding movement and change, genuinely, on the other person's part. You are not punished by what you, for what you did to me, but you are punished by doing it. You're punished by your own process. So if you harm me, yes, you've harmed me and I'm hurt. And I then don't retain any feeling, that harm passes through me. I recover. But if you don't acknowledge what you did to yourself, how is there forgiveness? Because you're just locked in. You're stuck. So I think we have to look at this more subtly. And Yeah.
Just a point, actually, it's very interesting what you just said, because perhaps in Buddhism we don't really have forgiveness in the way that is often used in the West. It's not about, please don't punish me.
That's where I would go with it too.
Very interesting. It's
I don't have the power to forgive you.
It's letting go of anger.
Resistment and punishment.
You have the power to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
Which is odd to people and say, well, I forgive. No, I'm not talking about you just saying something. The power to forgive yourself is absolutely acknowledging, accepting responsibility, taking what comes from that, and then changing.
Mm-hmm.
That is where forgiveness comes in. But me forgiving you, boy, that really trivializes it. And emotionally, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It's one-sided. So, anyhow, I was thinking, well, folks, we aren't going to get through 4, but that's okay. it's all right.
You can quickly
It's
read.
all right. I was thinking we were on the bowing pilgrimage, and we weren't too far. We were just around Half Moon Bay or someplace like that bowing, and Heng Sure did not talk and did not respond. So it was my job as a Dharma protector to talk. This guy goes by, and I hear his car turn around. He comes back. Nice car, parks his car, comes over. And he says, what are you guys doing? What is it about? Something about what you're doing really struck me. He says, you're out here bowing down. Who are you bowing to? And I said, well, we're not exactly bowing to anybody. We're sort of bowing away. Bowing away. Bowing away from what? Well, bowing away our bad habits and faults and, not good qualities. And he said, I never heard of that before. Can I ask you a question? He said. I said, sure, go ahead. He said, I'm on my way to Los Angeles. I'm driving down. And then he pulled his coat apart and he had a gun. And I says, and he said, no, don't worry, it's not about you. I said, okay. He said, I'm going down and I'm going to kill my wife and her lover. He said, I'm all set up to go down. She cheated on me, and he was actually my best friend. So this really, really hurts, and I can't forgive them. And so he says, what does your Buddhism or anything say about any of this? And I got this one moment to talk to this guy, and I said, well, my teacher has a verse, and it goes like this: truly recognize your own faults. Don't linger on the faults of others. Others' faults are just my own. Being one with everyone is great compassion. And he said, is that sort of like what goes around comes around? I said, yeah, that's sort of like that. And he sat there for a while, and he said, you mind if I just sit with you? It was part of the break. I was doing my writing, and I thought, okay. So I put my writing down. He sits next to me, cross-legged. He obviously is a hulk of a guy, can't sit lotus. And he said, oh, man, after a few minutes. He said, now I get it. He said, 8 or 9 years ago, I cheated on my wife. And I thought I could hide it from her. And then she found out. And our marriage was never the same after that. There was always this lingering, unresolved, And he said, all of a sudden I see this chicken's coming home to roost. Now it's coming back to me. And really, he said, and he did this with his hands. He said, this is like one circle. And if I don't stop it, it'll go on. And so he said, wow, okay. And then he said, the money I was using for my transportation, why don't you guys take it? Well, I took the money. It was quite a bit, but I just passed it on to the temple when someone came out to get the money. And he said, you got any use for a gun? I said, actually, no, we don't really have any use for a gun. He said, maybe I'll just toss in the ocean on my way back home. And you just feel it was palpable, his release from this. But the recognition that somehow, in some way, he was a party to this unresolved situation of distrust and cheating and hurt. And therefore, now he was in the opposite position. At the very most, he could say, this is not going to resolve it. And this is also not acknowledging that maybe I, by my actions, broke a trust that set in motion this kind of thing. Wow. And you could see he was reflecting and thinking about it, but at least in that moment he stopped from enacting a kind of vengeance, which is the opposite of forgiveness. But I would say in his own process too, he was going through his own acknowledgement of his role in this rather than seeing or asking, that they forgive him and so on and so forth. So it's just a story, but I like it in the sense that it's a real situation where I think at a deep level, this process of compassion related to forgiveness and letting go is very real, it's very human, very accessible, and the degree to which we make it deep and personal and psychological and get away from the other power forgiving and releasing us, will there be some hope? Not only that it effectively changes us, but it actually has an impact on the world. Asking courts or gods or whatnot to do the forgiveness thing really is still an externalist way of coming at this. Anyhow, what were you going to say?
I was going to ask you, just in terms of your inner processes, what brought to your heart that verse in response to him, and not going to some kind of, maybe more dogmatic response, like say killing's not good or something?
I'm not sure. It's interesting. That's the verse that came to my mind at that time. Maybe because he was faulting them. And so this happened a lot on the pilgrimage. I don't know why I would say what I said. Some things I said things that were totally inappropriate and stupid. Often, as equally as often, I'd say things that were helpful in this way. But in both cases, at least in that case, I don't know why I said that, why that came to me. But it resonated with him.
Mm-hmm.
That's what was interesting. Mm-hmm. And as he sat and reflected, somehow it triggered in him, truly recognized, I think I translated, don't linger on the faults of others. Others' faults are just my own. That line somehow kicked into him that he had done a similar thing, and it was unresolved. It was still in his heart. They hadn't actually adjusted that. And that was something he recognized. It's pretty interesting.
It's interesting because you're saying this, you were in the pilgrimage, many months of bowing. So speaking of this, the text is still and quietude.
Mm-hmm.
So you can probably read many unconsciously even elements of him, yourself, how to tune into the situation.
Mm-hmm.
My mind is very quiet and still. These right words come out, to some extent without even trying to find them.
I think so. And also, in order to do that, part of what the bowing did was to drop the charades and the falseness a lot, say in myself. And there's a vulnerability. But when people encounter that, because that's low and not up there, you're relating to them as real people. You're relating to them heart to heart, so to speak, with not this, I'm a monk and I'm going to teach you. I'm a religious, knowledgeable person. I'm going to preach to you, or I'm going to tell you what to do. It's more like, wow, I hear, I'm listening. And there's that space allows for somebody to go in and respond to something that wouldn't be there if they were being taught or directed. And so it's kind of like a position you want to be in all the time, of that relaxed, open humanity.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. So, well, I did not get to the last two verses tonight as I thought I might, but that's okay. This is something we can come to later. We'll start up again, my guess is early September, at least on the Friday night. And then I hope that maybe for all of you, this summer, you can find a time, even with the COVID over, And even with everything, quote, opening up, you don't open up too much. Almost like allow yourself, treat yourself to the possibility of a little purity and stillness this summer. Allow yourself to, I would even say, dare to be still. Dare to be still. Clearly, what this passage of text is coming back to again and again is that the best qualities of who we are as human beings, just as human beings, not to say as cultivators or even sages, the best qualities have to do with a quiet stilling of our busy minds and our busy emotions, a listening and paying attention, being available to what presents itself. This later passage will talk about spiritual penetrations, but spiritual penetrations are the natural result of being available to what presents itself, not projecting, not getting in the way, just observing and listening and stilling all the projected, frenetic activity we do. And so I'm saying, it's like it's summer, it's a natural time for things to go into that cycle, but unless you grab it, carpe diem, and really say, I'm going to treasure, this is the most important thing I can do this. What's the most important thing I can do this summer? Doing nothing. What? Really vacating, really going into wondrous emptiness. The idea is that my teacher would say, true emptiness is wondrous existence. Truly being empty, but I would say wondrous emptiness is true existence. I would also say that. So if you can get into the wondrous stillness, and that doesn't mean you have to meditate per se, it just means you have to not go out so much, not just be thrown off and eager and frenetic and frantic, just quiet, quiet. It could be as simple as, climb a tree and sit in a tree for an hour. Just sit in the tree. Or sit in meditation, or go for walks where you're removed and unplugged. And I hope, and I think, I know from my own experience, you will find things wondrous that were not available to you before. But you have to dare to be still. There will be pressures within. Like, what are you doing? What's that all about? This stuff. Here's your checklist. And there'll be people without. What are you doing this summer? Where are you going? What experiences are you going to chalk up? Well, I'm going to do 13 countries in Europe in 12 days, or I'm going to read War and Peace in Russian, or, what? Chill, give yourself a break. And I'm saying this not because you're going to allow yourself to be lazy, allow yourself to be wondrous, allow yourself to be fully open. So I think we have lost the value of what is not. And more than ever, when you have a summer moment, even if it's only a week or a couple weeks, if it's a full summer, get into the value, the wonder of what is not. And it's from that ground that the Avatamsaka arises. All the sutras arise from that ground. All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas come from that wondrous stillness. But it's something you have to grab for yourself. It's something you have to actually secure and just say, leave me alone. Now, you say, leave me alone to you guys. You leave me alone. But I have to say, leave me alone to me. I have to hold the mirror up and say, leave me alone. And then it could be a very interesting time. So that's my wish for you this summer. Of course, you can do this by connecting with nature. Again, that's a wonderful springboard into that solitude. By being out where there isn't connections and so forth, Wi-Fi. What did somebody tell? Oh yeah, you guys are telling me up in Oregon in the summer, there's no Wi-Fi reception. Although we have skillful ninjas who know how to crawl and creep into certain parts of the mountain where they can get a signal for a while, right? And now our Redwood Vihara, I'm told also, is sort of off the signal tower collection. And you might want to say that's a definition of what he enters and stays in the way place. Remember that verse from tonight? What was it? The first verse we had.
Someone sees him.
Perhaps someone sees him sitting in the way place. What that means is you don't have Wi-Fi reception. That's the way place, okay? Yeah, this is a way place, but it's plugged in. I'm using the plug-in to do this tonight. Well, you want to go to a real way place, you go where there's no plug-in, no Wi-Fi, no internet reception. Yeah. Okay, that's the new way place. The new Bodhi Manda is off the grid. Now, what do they call that? A blind spot or a dead spot?
Yeah.
Yeah, the dead spot. This is the value of what is not, okay? Hopefully I'll be doing some time of that in Maine, because Maine is also a dead spot. And I never feel more alive than when I'm in dead spots. So, is there something you want to announce or say in addition?
Yeah, we have some different switches in the schedule.
Yeah.
Let's see. So today, tomorrow's Saturday. I think Bhikkhu Bodhi is actually starting a retreat with Buddhist Global Relief on the Four Boundless Hearts, the Brahma Viharas. You find the Buddhist Global Relief website, and Jingwei Sure and myself are participating, also helping with one or two of the classes. And then, so that's, you can find it starting at 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. But what that means is our morning bowing will be canceled for Memorial Weekend, 7 to 8.
That's this coming weekend.
Yeah.
Yep.
This coming weekend. And then also we will be canceling the afternoon recitation from 12:30 to 1 p.m. on Sunday and Monday. We'll still have it tomorrow on Saturday in the afternoon 2 o'clock recitation, but our recitation on Sunday and Monday will both be canceled. Other than that, we have our Great Compassion Mantra, Dedication of Merit, which is this Sunday morning at 6 a.m. to 6:45.
What do you do?
We've been doing it since the pandemic began, which is people have dedicated themselves to reciting the Great Compassion Mantra on behalf of, you could say, the world and the difficulties people are undergoing because of the pandemic. And so each month we have a gathering everyone together. I think they almost like either like 250,000 of recitations.
It's a lot.
A lot. Something like every month.
250,000
50,000
of recitation.
Wow. That was my initial Dharma door.
Great Compassion
Great
Mantra.
Compassion Mantra. Yeah.
So that's,
I used to do it 108 times a day. I had my beads, and I used a little safety pin to where I got to, and then marked it with a safety pin. Boy, there was times when I was at 80 or 70, and I was asleep. It was already midnight, and it's back and forth, trying to do it. Yeah, it's a great Dharma door.
yeah. So that's anything
Yes,
else?
we have more. We have a retreat. We do it together with Service Space. Right?
Oh, the Noble Friendship
Noble
Retreat.
Friendship Pod. It was 2 weeks exploring what friendship means and what means noble friendship. How we can be a friend for ourselves and how to skillfully relate to others. So this is upcoming event. We also doing every Friday right now the bowing 3 steps 1 bow for India and surrounding countries. And so you can find on our website will be updated the new date, and you can sign up for that. We have many activities in the
I would
monastery.
say too that although it initiated with India, and it's tragic, clearly the nature of this virus is that it just keeps going around. And so even if you don't feel particularly aligned, say, with India, the idea that you could bow in this way for all places, for all
Yes.
beings who are suffering under this virus, have been, because it lingers, are now or about to be. When you started this, Taiwan was in the clear, and now it's not.
Yeah.
So do the universal transference
Yes.
is really powerful.
This one of idea that we can focus on different times and different places, but with the boundless heart, right? It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
limited, but any geographical location. So this is it. And if you decided to use Wi-Fi, you can find a lot of Dharma activities here. This is probably the best way to use your Wi-Fi, your phone or tablet. So we have morning ceremony, we have a meditation, 3 steps 1 bow every day. Dharma reflections. We're still reading the 3 steps 1 bow journals and letters. What we have more is a lot of things going on. We're still thinking how can look like opening for the monastery. And
Yeah, that reminds me, because usually you announce now the Oregon summer thing, but I'm gathering that's been
That's
postponed.
postponed.
It's postponed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even more compelling than that you find your own Oregon for yourself this summer, even if it's your backyard.
Yeah, so definitely you can stay tuned in. And tomorrow, Monk Heng Sure, 7:30, he will continue lecturing on Avatamsaka Sutra. And we heard also that today we have a chance to talk to Ajahn Naniko from Abhayagiri Monastery. We'll update on our website. They still continue the first Tuesdays when we have before here at BBM. So can through Zoom have a chance to attend their tea and dharma, I think with virtual tea and dharma and meditation and dhamma reflections.
Boy, a lot.
Yeah,
Rich.
yeah, it's quite a lot.
Okay.
Okay. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the Venerable Master.